Hello and welcome to the Amplitude Digital E-commerce podcast, where we talk about all the things that make e-commerce better and more profitable. Today, I'm glad to welcome Alex Flores, CEO of the digital agency Single Grain. Alex, how are you doing over there?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Great to have you. Appreciate if you could give us just a bit of background about your history and tell us a bit about Single Grain.
Sure. So my history, I am probably like just a handful of people in this industry. One of the veterans. I had an AOL 1.0 screen name, and very few people can say that. I remember when Netscape came out. So I've been in the industry for about 23, 24 years. I began my career as an HTML coder when that title existed for a publishing company in New York. And for the first 8+ years of my career, I went from HTML coder to senior web developer, learning languages like Perl and JSP and PHP and ASP along the way. Mm-hmm. And in October of 2004, I made the transition into account management for an agency called Mullen out of Boston, Massachusetts. And from that point forward, I've risen through the ranks of account management, eventually landing this CEO position at Single Grain. And Single Grain is a digital services, digital marketing, advertising agency with concentrations in media, social media, search, and SEO.
Fantastic. It's really, really good to have you here. We have a really meaty topic to delve into today. We're talking about this pandemic shift online, changed online behavior, perhaps forever. We see this in some ways that are very obvious, some that are very subtle. But one day soon, when the physical world returns, online is still going to be there. Brands will kind of need to shift quickly to encompass both these worlds or die. You and I were talking about some of the great data that's emerging about changing online behavior during pandemic. And I'm about to share some of that stuff. It's really cool data. But before we dig into that data, I'd like to just begin, Alex, with a general question to warm you up a little. This huge shift we're talking about here, do you believe this is a temporary change, or is it here to stay? Is it some sort of balance is emerging?
I think this is a genie that you can't put back in the bottle. Throughout our careers, there were always signs that in fits and spurts and in small doses, we could do our jobs, and a lot of jobs could be done remotely with the right tech, access to a conference call, a consistent high bandwidth that we could do. Now, the untested but now pretty well tested problem that existed, and the barrier that existed, was, can it happen at scale? Mm-hmm. And nobody was willing to try. Fortune 100s, Fortune 500s, 1,000 companies, no one was really willing to try. And now everybody was forced to do it, not try, but do it or do it or die. It wasn't without disruption, but most of the white collar jobs, so many of them have successfully transitioned, and some have actually thrived. It's going to be really difficult for that kind of normalcy to return to business. Now, you hinted at a hybrid, and I think that's where we'll land, but it will take a little while to get back there, not just because of the proven I can do this from home, but also because I don't know that if a vaccine comes out and COVID goes away, that people are going to feel safe again in large numbers, in close proximity. I think there's going to be a while before that kind of normalcy returns. Yes, things stay, and it eventually gets to a hybridization of what we used to see, but it's not something that's going to go back to the way it was.
I'm kind of with you there. It does seem like there's safety concerns. There's also just convenience things that happen when you realize how easy it is to get stuff shipped into your house as opposed to looking for yourself.
Yeah.
Which leads us to our first data point, shifting online demographics. Changes on online shopping behavior before and during COVID-19. As you might expect, you see people below 35 being early adopters, rushing online to do all sorts of things at a much higher frequency. People aged 35, 54, not quite so much, but still a pretty large shift. And even people 55 and older, those that are already kind of over the digital divide, are readily turning to this mode of reaching out and doing everything they need to do. What are your thoughts on looking at this data, and what do you see happening here in, permanently or temporarily?
When I looked at that data, it reminded me of video gamers' data and demographics. Not to continue to harp on my age, I just turned 46, so I do feel a bit older. I feel like now I'm taking aspirin every day just because I'm always in pain for some reason.
You're a spring chicken.
But I think back to when we were younger and Atari, Coleco, our parents and older people, when that was popular for us in the mid to late 80s, they looked at it like it was something for kids. People take their technologies and their experiences with them. The average age of a video gamer is 34 years old. It's not something for children any longer. This data reminds me, if you look at the people younger than 35 during, so that's 62%, as they get older, that will come with them. Like what they've experienced and what they're used to will persist. And that number down at the pit, people 55 and older, they will either adapt or just move off of these demographics and be overwhelmed by the sheer numbers coming out of Gen Y and Gen Z, because those numbers are like the baby boomers in terms of population size.
I really think that's true. Some of the things that are really going to draw that older population online, like for example, telemedicine, are just really getting started.
Great point.
Financial services, legal services, all the things that older people need and really have trouble getting out to get to will explode. It's really powerful in terms of what is going to be necessary to deliver just from a UX standpoint, from an app standpoint, from a device standpoint, to make sure that everybody can access everything, the ADA requirements, the privacy requirements, the terms can be, all this stuff is much more watched now, much more apparent to people, and will be something people are going to need to stay on top of.
Such a great point that you bring up regarding the user experience. My mother's 80 years old, and her mobile device is set to the highest resolution. So the numbers are big and the words are big, but she still has those faculties. Her vision is pretty good. Her hand mobility is great. We've been talking for years about the rise of voice at this point. And I think that when you bring up the user experience for the older generations, as they're forced to use more digital technologies, I'm surprised that I haven't read as much about the voice activations and the voice experience really taking root in the pandemic as something that people are using more of.
So let's talk a little more about devices too. Actually, it's interesting. I've got the slide here ready to go. So this is really interesting. This is from the New York Times, but it's looking at, we all think about optimize for mobile first, which is a great way to think with Google. But in this case, it seems that now people are at home and they have the choice between devices. They're not rushing from place to place. Suddenly, like, I don't want to do anything on this little thing when I can connect everything to my massive TV, or even just their own desktop or a laptop. It's way better than a mobile. So it's definitely kind of putting the emphasis on these larger screens again. And maybe people have not emphasized enough about speed or ability to navigate well or to get the full experience on desktops. Something to think about. Have you seen the same thing?
When you shared this data with me, I hadn't seen it before, but it made so much sense. With people. So I spent time in some big cities. I lived and worked in New York. I lived and worked in Boston, lived and worked in San Francisco. And those cities are really oriented towards commuting, mostly on trains, sometimes on buses, sometimes long walks. But a lot of people would use their mobile devices. So eliminate that from large population centers. And it makes sense that mobile use is going to go down and the desktop experience is going to rise. My hope when I saw this information was that if it affected businesses, it was a small amount of businesses, because I think you and I have been in the industry long enough that over the last decade, really, we've been having conversations with clients and consulting them to think mobile first, but not mobile only, and not to the detriment of the desktop experience. So if the pendulum for those companies hasn't swung too far into the mobile only space, then they're probably prepared for and are able to adapt to more people going back to the desktop experience. Maybe they've neglected some aspects of it because mobile was the predominant choice for people to engage with their brand or their content or their site. But with a few adjustments, maybe the shift back isn't as big a lift for them to achieve as it was when they went mobile first. That's my hope for a lot of companies, that they're not experiencing technical difficulties as their market experience has shifted back to something that they thought they left behind a decade ago.
Oh man. Yeah, it's one thing actually that it seems to come up a lot in the optimizations that we see needed by companies as they come in, often has to do with device optimization and what kind of results they're getting on mobile versus desktop and how they're mixing and marrying those two modes.
Yeah,
so this just really spoke to me, and we'll see again what happens after COVID. I guess it just kind of makes me feel good about, screens again. Doesn't all have to be about the device.
Yeah.
And what the way you said it, to be good at both is really the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and my hope is that, a lot of enterprise systems and organizations, we'll say in the Fortune 2000, have likely spent and invested enough in their platforms so that each device has a good enough experience for people to accomplish the task and to get value out of the experience. And for the smaller organizations, again, my hope is that they've moved to the Wix, Squarespace, WordPress, Drupals of the world that behind the scenes have created their platforms so that they can adjust and render appropriately to various devices without the smaller organizations that don't have an IT team of 50 plus people and millions of dollars in salaries and cost, that they're able to use those platforms and those platforms do the adjusting for them. That's my hope. But for those companies that don't have that, perhaps your company and mine can provide them the services that they need to get there.
Let's hope we'll be there for sure.
Yeah.
So this is also this third slide that I sent you. I thought was also really interesting in view of what we talked about, is just sort of new thinking amongst your average citizen about how much connection in their lives goes on online, in addition to the phone, which they're very familiar with, voice conferencing, video conferencing, FaceTime, and of course, Google Classroom. I have children here at home, and we're Zooming right now. Observe this in a couple of different ways in what we're seeing. One is that we have clients that do things like tours for schools, for example, looking to enroll new students. The ability to suddenly start doing virtual tours has actually increased their ability to do tours, increase their ability to kind of connect with people so they don't actually need to drive down. And it kind of they're not going to do away with in-person tours, but it's like suddenly just put a whole new idea in their mind of how they can communicate with new people and bring them into their funnel.
Yeah.
So it's pretty exciting. And of course, Nextdoor, if you've experienced that, is pretty interesting. How you can learn more about your neighbors and kind of get into your own little community in a way that previously you might not have.
Yeah.
House party, also kind of global communication and connection and just great partying. So it's just different modes for different people. Because what do you think about is the changing as far as expectations? Do you see this lasting, and do you see this sort of people throwing aside their devices once the orders come up? We can all run outside and we'll be communicating the same way again. How do you see there?
My thoughts on this dovetail a bit from the first part of our discussion with regard to a change to, or a return to the normalcy we once experienced is, in my opinion, not very likely. So as it relates to the social nature and expectations of digital, now that we're all forced into a very similar situation, it reminded me a bit of what Southwest and Delta and Best Buy all had to do about 10 or 12 years ago, when customer service was always through phone banks and through customer service 1-800 numbers, but they were experiencing waves of problems online that they didn't have their finger of the pulse on. And they didn't realize for a period of time that, like, wow, hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of people are really piling up on us, but they're not calling our call centers. So the Geek Squad and Twitter help and customer service moved into Twitter, into online spaces. And the reason why this stat began getting me thinking about that time is that offline, uh, offline and online were disconnected, and everything went into online. Now it's like online and online are a bit disconnected, meaning that there are these experiences from Amazon Watch, Netflix Watch Party, Nextdoor, House Party, all of these apps that you've just talked about. I think that there might be a kind of evolution and expectation where, all right, we're using video chat a lot more now. I don't know about you, but when I speak with people, I'm used to it being over Zoom or Teams or Skype or Google Hangouts. And it feels weird if I'm talking to somebody on the phone without being able to see them. Now, extrapolate that into customer service, and it might be the immediacy that you get from sending a message to Verizon or to Best Buy through Twitter with a complaint and you're not getting a response. It might be that you want to do video chat. Like I dial into my credit card or whatever now, and it's waiting on a phone, and you get a little heated, right? You can get a little mad. And could you, I imagine a world where if some companies move their customer service experience to a video chat platform that's becoming ubiquitous in our society and around the world, I think that the heat that people bring to a customer service when it's a faceless person, I can't believe my credit card statement has this charge on it, this is BS. But now you're seeing somebody, are you gonna get as mad at them? Are you gonna have like maybe customer service calls bring the temperature down a bit if it's video chat? I don't know. It's just, it made me think of the evolution of customer service because the expectations are that we will be doing more video, and we're getting so used to it that if we go back to a kind of normalcy, this is another thing that our online experiences, I think that'll persist. I think we'll continue with video chats and these types of expectations. Also, it got me thinking about the promise of and the initial thoughts way back when the internet first really became commercialized in the mid-90s. It's like, oh, you'll do all your shopping online. Yeah, and a lot of us do, but we do it as a singular thing where like I go to Amazon and I don't have all my friends with me, but now could you imagine going to Amazon like on a Zoom call, share the screen, like, oh no, choose that one, choose that one. So like there is the social nature of shopping that could potentially evolve into the online space more so than it does now because it still feels pretty one-on-one, but shopping with people online like you do in the offline world, maybe that's something that evolves out of this too.
I think all of the above is true. Absolutely. There's a sense of social connection that comes with video and seeing people.
Yeah.
And I think it's also, it kind of goes both ways too. When you're talking about the customer service experience, to actually be able to see your customer, you know, in distress or sad or mad, it kind of gives you more empathy for them as a person and how your business is really responding to their needs, even though it's a digital business.
That's a good point.
The more it feels real, like there's real people there, the more people are likely to really want to engage with it. And as you've probably seen, like there's nothing like an angry customer turned into a happy one to be the most loyal possible thing you can have that writes great reviews. And I can't believe how good they treated me. So those sort of things I think we're just beginning to understand. I'd read an article early on in the Zoom surge here about how Zoom calls that have a lot of people on them can be stressful because it's kind of like you're facing a wall of eyes looking at you. You don't know where to look. Yeah. I understand that, but I also feel that as it gets more familiar to you, it does become just human nature to you just to say, oh gosh, I can't see you. Like, I really need to see you. I want to see you.
Yeah, I agree.
Really something interesting there. So we've talked about a lot of different sort of modes in which digital is transforming right now in people's lives. I just wanted to give you a crack at that term, a digital business transformation. And kind of on the enterprise level, what would you say would be the top kind of priority things that you would be thinking about and how to capitalize and also just eliminate risk?
One of the differences, digital business transformation has been a term, like you just said, that's been around a while. It used to be that you wouldn't know what a company was doing because they kept it under wraps. They wanted to innovate and create proprietary systems, and you didn't necessarily have a good view into what they were doing. And different companies at all sizes, but we're talking enterprise level. So again, I'll just talk about the Fortune 500, let's say. They were all innovating at different speeds and doing things at different speeds. That's because they were in different different levels of their expertise and their investment in transforming their businesses, and different levels of need. Some businesses didn't necessarily have to move as quickly as financial services might have had to because of the advent of mobile banking and the expectation of having mobile banking. If you're a manufacturer like 3M or a life insurance provider like New York Life, do you really have to move online when you have just a random monthly payment? So I bring that up to lay the groundwork for it is now out in the open, and the top priorities would be to, I think, emulate what you see out there because everyone's going through the same thing. And those that have been more mature in developing their digital business transformation processes, it's now laid bare for everyone to see because everyone is now doing digital out of survival. So I would, if I were to like list the top three, look around and learn, emulate what you can, copy what's out there so you don't have to go through. If I was an enterprise technology manager at a large organization, I don't have to start from scratch. I don't have to whiteboard with a large team. What are we going to do? Almost every competitor in the industry has begun doing something and has accelerated into a place where if they're still in business today, it kind of means they survived. So how did they survive? And you could look at it and basically understand there's all sorts of forensic analyses over why companies declared bankruptcy and died a couple months into the pandemic. And those forensic analyses show so often that they didn't take advantage of the time that they had to really make their business robust online so that if it ever became online only because of global catastrophe or natural disaster, that they could survive. Nordstrom, for example, Sears, there's lots of companies that didn't make the transition in time. And so from an enterprise level, I would prioritize searching for competitors that have survived and emulating and learning from what they've done so I could shortcut the solutions I put in place to ensure my business not only survives, but begins to thrive again.
Do you have any examples of, or maybe just one that you have seen out there that's kind of responding in a way that seems very future forward?
Yeah, I actually have. But the thing is, I'll call out a couple of brands, but I think an entire industry benefited in two ways. The entire industry of supermarkets and grocery stores, because they were marked as an essential service, they were allowed to stay open. But I also think that because they were emulating the online offline experience by doing order your groceries, we'll pack them for you and you can pick them up, or we do delivery services. I think that entire industry, and I experienced this industry from two different coasts. I moved from Los Angeles to South Carolina in the middle of the pandemic back in June. And so when I was in Los Angeles in Southern California, I saw Safeway and I saw Ralph's. And within weeks of the quarantining starting for everybody, they had plexiglass up, they had decals all over the floor, they had operationalized their supermarket aisles in such a way that you could only go one way down this aisle, another way down the other aisle, to ensure that there was social distancing, like with an almost unbelievable expediency. An entire industry operationalized pandemic protocols. And I thought, well, I'm in Los Angeles. It's a really resourceful, very rich area. So I think that they just have, because of the millions of people who live there, they just did this faster. Now I'm on the East Coast. I'm in South Carolina, not nearly in as big a city as Los Angeles. And all of the supermarkets here have very similar. So they've adopted online and offline behaviors and merged the two very well so that the entire industry seems to be thriving. And I admit that they are helped by having been marked as an essential service. So they didn't have to shut down and figure things out. They did this on the fly, but they seem to have done it exceptionally well.
It's really incredible to see that sort of thing in that kind of response nationally too is really something.
Yeah. I was surprised. I didn't expect South Carolina to have that level of efficiency thrown into all of the supermarkets, but the ones out here, Food Lion, Publix, my favorite, Piggly Wiggly, they all nailed it. They all have it.
I would say one thing that I would love to see at the grocery that I've not seen yet, though maybe this is happening. In Home Depot, if you go in there and you're looking for a particular little widget of some kind, you can look it up on their website and it will tell you in the location you're in exactly what bin, what aisle, everything is.
Wow.
And now there's so many new brands of all kinds of healthy stuff that they're kind of testing in various places in a Vons or a Ralph's, but it might not be exactly where you expect. Like you might be looking for cauliflower, crust pizza, and it's not next to the other pizzas. It's over in the health food section. Or that would be a really useful thing and save time. Do you know you're going to the store to get the particular thing and not have to go through every aisle? Talk to somebody. Again, it's just maximizing or minimizing the amount of time you have to spend in the store and interacting with other people. Seems like a pretty simple thing to do. But again, there's a lot of great stuff that can happen between the digital world and the physical one to make both really great.
Yeah, that idea that you just brought up that you'd like to see in supermarkets, I hope people in the retail industry and supermarkets watch this, because I mean that idea right there is gold, especially with the pandemic. Nobody really wants to spend more time than they need to indoors searching for something they can't find. If you have an app that gives you a targeted strike, third shelf, aisle 3, that's where I'm going, and I'm getting the hell out of there.
Well, from our mouths to God's ears. Let's hope it comes soon.
Right.
Well, Alex, I've taken a bunch of your time. I really appreciate your spending time with us here today and giving us your thoughts. How can people learn more about you and get in touch with you and your company?
Well, anybody who goes to singlegrain.com, you can contact me or my team through the site. We've got lead forms, of course, and free consulting and whatever you want there. But if you want to connect with me personally, LinkedIn is the way to get to me, and I'm easily found.
So thank you for tuning in to the Amplitude Digital E-commerce podcast. Please stay in touch at amplitudedigital.com. Wishing you plenty of success.